Brethren, thank you for joining us and being part of this historic first webinar. It is our desire to ensure that as many Freemasons understand the constitutional changes being proposed and the journey that your board has been on. The greatest change to our organisation in possibly 127 years. Change in our organisation has traditionally not been easy. The information that has been provided since earlier this year through the circulation of EDMs, our Masonic Journal, the advice at the various quarterly communications and the various forums over the last 3 months has been undertaken to ensure that we are true to the address that I delivered in April. It was my desire that we bring the membership along on this journey by sharing information and ultimately unite, improve, grow and strengthen our great organisation. Unfortunately, the President of the Board of General Purposes, Brother Richard Elkington, could not be with us in person, but has dialed in so that he can be part of this webinar. And it is also my pleasure to introduce our Deputy Grand Master, Brother Keith Murray. Please let us reiterate the journey thus far, and I therefore hand over to Brother Richard Elkington.
Well, thank you, Grandmaster. I'm delighted to explain the journey we've been on essentially for the last 12 months, which was launched with the commissioning of a thorough review of the structure and organisation effectiveness of Freemasons Victoria. That report was conducted by Elgin Consulting in response to a strong sense that we weren't fulfilling the strategic objectives of Freemasonry Victoria, I guess because we were consumed by day-to-day operational matters. We also had evidence that the board was not in alignment with its committees and not in alignment with the Freemasonry Victoria. So we had sort of competing and tension within our organisation structure. And that was, I guess, the evidence for commissioning Jeremy Consulting to conduct his review. That commenced in October last year and reported to the board in February. There was a number of key recommendations of that report, which were then worked on by a change management group within the organisation. Put quite simply, there was a number of recommendations and they were contained within three streams. One was to do with the first stream was to do with the structure and operation of the Board of General Purposes, where essentially the chair of the board will now be appointed by the board. There's a recognition that chairs of the Board of General Purposes need to offer stability to the organisation, so they should stay for up to 4 years. The chair of the board is accountable to the board and is responsible for the operation and functioning of that board. The chair of the board will be responsible for managing the chief executive of Freemasons Victoria. At least one member of the board will participate in committees and portfolios of the organisation, and the appointment of members of the board in future will be undertaken by a committee with the requisite skills and experience in the operation of boards and the responsibilities of directors to make those appointments. So of course we'll be conducting internal reviews of board effectiveness. But the second suite of recommendations was to do with the operation of committees and portfolios. As I said earlier, we had a situation where the Grand Master would appoint the chair of portfolios and committees. For example, a Grand Superintendent of Membership or Grand Superintendent of Education, and they weren't necessarily aligned to the corresponding functions within Freemasonry Victoria. Of course, what we're now seeking through these changes is that heads of volunteer function committees or portfolios will be appointed on the basis of merit, whether they be a Master Master Mason or a Senior Grand Officer. And the Grand Master may choose to appoint a chair of committee or portfolio appointed on merit, which may then choose to, but not necessarily appoint a chair to the ceremonial team. And I think that's it's been, I guess, a point of contention as we've journeyed around over the last couple of months talking about these constitutional amendments. The first suite of recommendations dealt with the role and operation of Freemasonry Victoria. And clearly, as I said at the opening, our organisation tended to be dominated by by day-to-day issues, and the chief executive role will be separated from that of the Grand Secretary, allowing the chief executive to focus on the business part of the organisation, and putting it simplistically, the Grand Secretary would then focus on the Masonic and ceremonial aspects of Freemasonry Victoria. Chief Executive is to be appointed by, as she has been, by the Board of General Purposes, and will report to the President of the Board of General Purposes. The Chief Executive will be responsible for hiring, motivating, inspiring, rewarding performance management of professional staff. And we would expect leaders of those functions within Freemasonry Victoria would be appointed on the basis of merit, skills and experience, and may not necessarily be Freemasons. So they're essentially the flavour of the recommendations arising from the Cattell report in those three streams. And so the constitutional amendments have been framed to give effect to those recommendations, which were carried by the board, supported by the board in July this year. And the constitutional amendments were then submitted to the September quarterly communication. There's been a roadshow conducted since September, right across Victoria. It's been publicised in the EDMs, which are issued on a weekly basis. It's been publicised in a number of other forums which Freemasonry Victoria relies upon to communicate with its members. There has been one amendment submitted, and that was by Most Worshipful Brother Gary Sebo, which addressed his concern about the potential for the constitutional amendments as submitted quarterly to diminish the role of the Grand Master. I recall being asked before, back in September, what's the role of the Grand Master? Where does he sort of fit into? How do you define the government's role of the Grand Master? I said, well, the Grand Master's like the Governor General or Governor of the state, and the President of the Board of General Purposes is like the Premier or the Prime Minister. And as we all know, when you start thinking about Governors General, they do carry a reserve power. The Grand Master takes an obligation to preserve the landmarks of the organisation. And so he sits over and above the operation of Freemasons Victoria. And it's always been understood, if not stated explicitly, that he does have reserve powers to preserve the organisation. Gary Sebo's amendment addressed itself to, rather than accepting that there are implied powers of the Grand Master, to make those powers explicit. So the Board of General Purposes last Thursday night debated that matter and has accepted that amendment, which has been distributed in electronic form widely across Victoria. So that's really the journey we've been on for the last 14 months. relevance. Which brings us to a vote on this Wednesday night. And we urge that in order to give effect to these changes, and it's not change for change's sake, it's really to modernise the organisation, to introduce sort of contemporary business management practices, and really set the organisation for this change that's necessary. So we no longer accept that we're in decline. We no longer accept that perhaps we're not as relevant as we used to be. But to actually ensure the relevance of Freemasonry to today's man. I'll now hand it back to the Grand Master.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. Brethren, I also invite any further questions that you may have on an online address, which I think, or I believe, is visible on your computers. I think it's very important to note at this stage, on top of our President of the Board's explanation, that whilst we were receiving some feedback from those forums, that when it came to Brother Gary Sebo expressing his concerns about the power of the Grand Master, that we in fact engaged Gary to make sure that he put his issues forward, and we listened. We listened to those that were at the forum, and we listened to Most Worshipful Brother Gary as well. Can I also say that last Thursday, the amendments suggested by Most Worshipful Brother Gary Sebo were considered by the Board of General Purposes and received unanimous support. Moving on, I'd like to now ask Brother Keith Murray, our Deputy Grand Master, to share with us some questions we have already received and let us provide some answers.
Thank you, Grand Master. Yes, there have been a few brethren who have submitted questions, and the first of these is from Brother Jim King, whose question is, why have the Gary Sebo amendments to be considered at this week's quarterly only been circulated 7 days out? Many members will be unaware of the proposed controversial amendments and had little or no time to respond to them. That's the first question.
Terrific. Thank you, Jim. Richard, have you got anything to add to Jim's question?
Yeah, I certainly have. First, I'll adjust myself to the notification of the amendment to members. We only received the written submission from Gary Sebo late. It was submitted to the board on Thursday night for consideration. That was dealt with around 9 o'clock on Thursday night. Very early on Friday morning, we issued that electronically to 5,000 members. I understand that half our membership is not on email. It, however, does go to secretaries, does go to district coordinators. So there's a network available for distribution. But I understand the difficulties we have ongoing issues with ensuring timely communication to those who are not on email, but we're operating within the systems that we have. That's one issue. Second issue is, in some ways, it was an advantage to us to have Gary Sebo submit that amendment, even though it was really only in the last couple of weeks that we were aware that it was arriving. He could have actually stood up on the floor of Grand Lodge on Wednesday night and moved the amendment from the floor, so that we had no notification, debated off the floor of the Grand Lodge. So we would have all been caught, I guess, cold, and had no notification, and it would have been put. So So in some ways, we've been reasonably well served by Gary, as you said, Grandmaster, putting his skills to good use and drafting an amendment and providing it to us with some notice that had been given to the membership. Albeit, we don't live in a perfect world, but we've done our best within the constraints that we have.
Thanks, Richard. I think it's important to note that the EDMs have gone to some 5,600 of our membership. As you say, not perfect. But I think it's also worthwhile noting that Rule 89 of our Book of Constitutions requires that copies of the agenda and associated documents are to be given out to a select number of our membership. That doesn't include the general membership. The decision made was to ensure that we sent this amendment and that as many members of our organisation received the amendment prior to the quarterly communication. And there will be certainly at the main centre. I'm not too sure how we're going to go in relation to those centres that are viewing online. There'll certainly be hard copies of that amendment. Brother Deputy.
Okay, the next question also from Brother Jim is, how is the Board of General Purposes going to keep members without email up to date with about the upcoming changes? So I think going on from what you said, obviously what we've been doing is we've been increasingly producing electronic newsletters which have been circulated on a weekly basis. I also know from my own experience that a number of these have been included in lodged newsletters and also in fact in lodged summons. There's also been a survey which has been active for probably about 10 days, which has a specific question on how members want to be communicated with in future. So I think what we're already identified is that our system is certainly not perfect, but what we are trying to do is listen to the members on what vehicles that we do have available to us currently and how else they would like to be listened to and how they would like to be in a position to respond to these questions. This is the first webinar, I think, that Freemasonry Victoria, I'm not sure if any other Grand Lodge in Australia has done one of these yet, but again, this is all about innovation and trying to make sure a transparent and open dialogue with our members as much as possible. And even this afternoon, whilst people are watching this, they can certainly continue to submit questions, which to the best of our ability we'll certainly answer on the spot as well.
Yep.
So hopefully, Brother Richard, as you're the president, you will ensure that we do keep our members up to date about the upcoming changes.
Absolutely, and I think the entire board is dedicated to ensuring that all of our members are kept fully informed as best we can do it within the constraints that we have. And we've been a period of change from where we've been to where we want to be. And I think most of our members will acknowledge, I think, that we've actually made some great strides in communication, even in the last 6 months. So we're on a continual period, a continual path of improvement. But we do have some way to go, and it particularly relates to timely notification of members without email. Well, that actually may well best be done through lodges themselves or through districts. So yes, we all bear some responsibility in this, and the best form of communication may well be from lodges to those members who are not on email.
Next question relates to the number of changes. As the brethren will realise, there are 38 changes to the Constitution, and this question comes from Brother Bruce Stockdale. He says, with so many changes, why is there only one ballot at the quarterly? This doesn't give the opportunity, nor the time, if is the essence, to the extent that we have to have an all or nothing attitude.
That's a very interesting question, and in some ways I'm surprised it's taken so long to be asked, because I certainly haven't had that asked in doing the rounds of meetings. Look, the motion was submitted as a total resolution requiring a suite of changes to our constitution. I guess the simple answer is that
Sorry,
all those
I didn't
changes
get that.
are necessary to effect the structural and operational effectiveness review. The practicality of it is that at board level, we didn't see those changes as being particularly controversial, and therefore they wouldn't warrant an individual debate about the merits of each particular constitutional change. I guess the practicality is that democracy is a wonderful thing. We're the first to defend democratic institutions, but I guess the reality is if we did spend time debating each motion, the practicality is that we would be there for a considerable time. That's not to decry the ability to do so, but I believe that given that they are, in my view, sensible changes to the correct effectiveness of our organisation across three streams of our activity: the board, our committees, and the Freemasonry Victoria, that best way to go about this is to consider those cognately or as a block.
Yeah, I think it's also fair to say that having spent 10 weeks, and a number of us have been out to various forums, is that if there had been a sense from the membership that they wanted to debate each one individually, then the board would certainly give them consideration to that. But I think what I got from the impression of the membership was that many of these amendments, in their view, were long overdue, and they were, I think, satisfied that a great deal of consideration had been given to why they were being put forward and what the impacts were going to be, and largely, with perhaps one or two exceptions, they were very supportive of it. So I think whilst there's certainly merit in going through each individually, if we felt that was necessary, I think the number of positions from a number of the brethren was that it was effectively a fairly straightforward exercise to support in global.
I think so. I mean, most of the discussion I had at lodge level was really about what it is we're trying to do as an organisation, how we're trying to change the organisation, what the future of the organisation will look like, what the strategies are, and rather than the constitutional amendments in themselves. So on that basis, really, there's little argument, I think, at lodge level about the merits of each individual clause, because together they were seen to be what's necessary to be implemented to achieve the organisational change which we see as having merit.
Yeah. I think also what needs to be understood that some of those rules intertwine to others. So by unravelling it and voting individually, that could have had a situation of not achieving the desired result, and basically we would have gone back to September rather than moving forward, which is of course one of the things that we're all keen to do, is move forward, change the organisation, make it stronger, make it better, unite it as we move forward. So I think that's the desire, of course, from these changes. Brother Keith, have you received any other?
Yeah, there's another good question here from Brother Peter White, and this is in regard to the new structure. And his question is, what will the new structure look like? And in particular, what will be the relationship between the board, the chief executive, and the various committees and the Grand Master?
Richard, you might be in a position to answer that.
There's been a number of, there was an interim organisation structure issued, it must have been the September quarterly, I think, sort of in the recent past, we showed we had 18 committees. It showed that the personnel within the organisation and the various sort of portfolio chairs and grand lodge officers. On Thursday night, the board approved a new organisation structure. Again, this is all structures are always a work in progress, because you actually design an organisation structure, not just for the sake of it, but actually to deliver the strategy of the organisation. So the strategy, of course, the strategic plan will also be launched on Wednesday night. So we put in place an organisation structure which shows that we have a number of board committees, finance, audit, risk, agenda, and strategic planning committee. We have a number of committees which report through the Grand Secretary to the board. And they are ones which are actually specified in the Constitution, such as legal and constitutional. And then we have a number of committees which the Chief Executive is empowered to establish essentially any time, as a matter of delivering the strategic plan, which will revolve around communications, marketing, and then into the project-based committees. Now, what's been taken offline and will be discussed, hopefully established, hopefully by the new year, will be how we best utilise our volunteers in that arrangement. Many members will understand that we have in place a membership committee, a Masonic Knowledge Committee, a marketing communications committee, a IT reference group, which sought to build volunteers into a role of advising the organisation from a Masonic perspective, a lodge perspective, on some aspects of our strategic plan. We met with the representatives of a number of the committees, and we're now looking at how we more effectively carry that out, and at the same time build them into assisting the organisation with the strategic plan and supporting advising the officers of Freemasons Victoria. So clearly operating through the Chief Executive. So that's some work that's been done offline. So to answer the question, in terms of specific dates, we would expect that there will be a position put to a board meeting, but the next board meeting will be in February 2017. But we're looking to have that structure examined and designed by early in the new year.
Yeah, I think one of the main changes, and certainly it's required as part of the Constitution, is the connection between currently what has been the Grand Master and the appointment of the Chief Executive and Grand Secretary. Is that in future the Chief Executive will be appointed as it is currently, with Jane, with the board taking that responsibility. Also with the portfolio officers, in the past it would be a requirement on the Grand Master prior to the Grand Installation to actually submit a list of names of those to be invested as portfolio officers. That again is being changed, so that the board will be taking greater responsibility to ensure that where there is a requirement for a portfolio officer, that the board is considered and makes the final assessment on who is the best person to fill that role, in order to make sure that the board's expectations on strategy and alignment and organisation are also reflected in the key appointments to these portfolios. So I think that's a fairly fundamental change to the Constitution. And whilst the Grand Master obviously is going to retain influence and input into that, the change is certainly going to be significantly more so that the President, in fact, of the board is no longer going to be appointed by the Grand Master either. He in turn is going to be appointed by the Board of General Purposes, either from within the membership of the board or potentially the board could choose a member external to the board who they feel is most suited to that role. So I think those are some key changes, but much more probably in line with how one would expect an effective business and operation for our members to operate.
Thank you, Keith. I think it's also important, and Richard, you alluded to it. I think it needs to be emphasised that on Wednesday night, the draft strategic plan will be rolled out to the membership. And the idea behind that is so that we get the members taking ownership and coming along on the journey in relation to our future. That will sit on the table until early March, wherein we expect and want feedback from our members in relation to what's being proposed for the future of this organisation, so that hopefully by April we can roll that out as our strategic plan and start to engage with those committees, etc., in delivering that to Freemasons Victoria, which I think is very important. Now, it appears that there's no more questions that are coming from anyone. So maybe as a means, and we're a little bit ahead of time, but Richard, I wonder whether you would like to give us some final comments, and then I'll ask the deputy to do the same thing before I close this webinar down.
Yeah, look, the final comments I'd like to make, Grandmaster, really address themselves to the need to support the constitutional amendments on Wednesday night to give effect to a new organisation structure, to new governance arrangements for Freemasonry Victoria, to provide an important foundation for us to be a successful organisation. As I said earlier, we've been watching decline for some time now. We're now at 9,500 members. We see ourselves, we are all passionate about Freemasonry. That's why we do what we do. That's how we start doing it, because we love the organisation and we want to see the organisation be successful. But it can't be successful unless it has the appropriate structure and skills and management to do that. And these amendments are necessary in order to enable that to happen. Just the other point to make is that I know there is some concern about the amendment to the amendments proposed by Aaron Sevo. Let me assure all those who are on this webinar that, firstly, this is what his amendments do is to record explicitly what's been regarded as implicit, implied for 127 years. Secondly, the consequences of the Grand Master exercising that reserve power are significant. If the Grand Master were to overrule his board, were to take action against individuals, the reality is that the Grand Master needs to provide a description, a justification for having done so, to export the communication of the Grand Lodge. And so it sets in train a whole range of events which would not be attractive either to the organisation or indeed publicly. So what I assure members of the intent of the board in supporting that particular amendment submitted by most worshipful Brother Gary was a simply recognition that this is making explicit what's been implicit
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for joining us. Deputy.
Thank you, Grandmaster. I mean, I think from my point of view, I think where we are at the moment is we're on the brink of a new era. And instead of managing decline, we're preparing ourselves for rebuilding pride in the membership and also providing us an organisation that has got some robustness to it, is accelerating a programme which is going to build successful and burgeoning membership. That's my hope, and I certainly believe that the membership understands that the work that has gone into preparing these amendments has been considerable, and the decisions which have already been taken in terms of the appointments are certainly preparing us for that future. And I would encourage the brethren to get behind us and move forward with the organisation and vote for the amendments on Wednesday.
Thank you, Brother Keith. I also, of course, look towards your support, brethren, in those constitutional changes and the amendment as raised by Most Worshipful Brother Gary. And I would encourage all of you to attend a centre that is live streaming, or indeed the Pullman Hotel. We are listening, brethren. We need your support to ensure that this organisation moves forward and is strengthened. Please consider giving your support to those amendments. Freemasonry is an organisation of good men supporting each other, their families, and the community. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.